Welcome to Worst Anime Ever, a series where I reluctantly watch a variety of anime the general public considers to be completely fucking dogshit, or painfully mediocre at best, in an in-depth journey to find the worst one, or pleasantly come upon a hidden gem. Today we are looking at the anime titled I Parry Everything, with a 6.9 on my anime list. A decent rating, but looks can be egregiously deceiving. Nevertheless, here is a brief description for those of you who only watch peak anime. The Kingdom of Clays is in chaos after an assassination attempt on Princess Lin, with neighbouring nations circling like vultures. But Noor knows nothing about that. After over a decade of grueling, solitary training in his mountain home, Noor arrives at the royal capital, determined to pursue his childhood dream of becoming an adventurer. Even if his only skill is the seemingly useless ability to parry thousands of swords in a single breath, his path won't be easy. But if there's one thing Noor refuses to back down from, it's hard work. Now, to start off with, and this is very fucking important, I Parry Everything is a character-based anime. Meaning, if the characters aren't well written and are unable to keep you engaged, especially the main character, the anime itself simply isn't going to work. So the big question here is, does this anime have a good core cast of characters? Well, the short answer is absolutely fucking not. Like, goddamn, it's a shame really. I really wanted to like this show because of its premise, but it does way too much wrong to be enjoyable, even as a feel-good anime, which, by the way, is no excuse for poor writing. With the exception of maybe one character, and that's a big fucking maybe, the entire cast, including the main lead, is absolutely atrocious. Not even mediocre, just bad. And that's the core issue, along with a whole slew of other problems trailing behind it. To better explain what I mean, let's delve deeper into the biggest problem with this show, its characters. Let's start with the main lead, Noor. Noor's backstory, actually pretty solid. As a kid, shortly after his mother died, he travelled to the kingdom to join a guild and pursue his dream of becoming an adventurer. The guild told him he needed at least one skill to qualify. Unfortunately, he failed to acquire any skills, except for being really good at parrying, so they sent him packing from whence he came. So far, I have no issues with the backstory. It's actually pretty solid. Ironically, the biggest issue with his character is the very thing that defines him, his parrying mechanic. And yeah, I get it. The anime is literally called I Parry Everything, but let me explain my reasoning here. Now, the parry mechanic itself is a pretty cool concept, but only for about 2 fights. After that, it's the same repetitive routine when it comes to every encounter in this show. There's no tension in any fight because you already know what's going to happen, and it becomes extremely tiresome to watch. 10 guys swinging swords at once? Parry. Giant minotaur ready to smash him to pieces? Parry. A literal Dragon Ball style laser beam flying at him at max speed? Fucking parry. That's it. That's the whole fight choreography. Since half the anime is just fights where Noor parries for fucking free, half the anime ends up being a chore to sit through. And the worst part, he never actually capitalizes on his parries. The entire point of a parry is to deflect an attack in a way that leaves your opponent open for a massive counterattack. But Noor never follows through. He just endlessly parries until the enemy either gives up or somehow loses their weapon at a weird angle that gets them killed. And speaking more about the parry mechanic, let's talk about the sword itself. After Noor saves Princess Lin from the aforementioned Minotaur, King Clays rewards him with a sword forged from the strongest metal ever known, making it basically unbreakable. This means Noor can swing it around like willy fucking nilly and never suffer any consequences for spamming parries. There's no strategy, no clever use of his skill, just endless, mind-numbing parries. Honestly, it's exhausting to watch. Now, this could all be forgiven if Noor himself had the right personality to complement his parrying mechanic. The only problem? He actually might have the worst possible personality to pair with it. For some reason, the writers thought it would be a good idea to make Noor's character as dumb as Patrick fucking Star from SpongeBob. Now, to be fair, his stupidity actually makes sense within his backstory. Homeboy has had little to no social experience or knowledge of the outside world, so when he's finally exposed to it, he's bound to misread social cues, mess up interactions, and get multiple things factually incorrect. Which, ironically, is the only reason he ends up in half the situations he's in. In this regard, the writing is low-key brilliant. The writers clearly tried to put themselves in Noor's shoes and accurately portray what someone like him would experience when thrown into an unfamiliar world with no social awareness to speak of. Unfortunately, this just doesn't work for the kind of story they're trying to tell. If Noor were in a slice-of-life anime centered around this concept, that type of medium can work pretty well for that kind of character concept. But in a show where half of the anime is combat-related and his unique mechanic needs a strong, compelling character behind it to make his character as a whole engaging, placed into a world that reinforces that dynamic, it completely falls apart. And it's not just Noor's character that suffers. This drags down every other character too. Noor's idiocy infects everyone around him. Every time Noor misinterprets something about the world, gets facts wrong, or does something so wildly out of pocket that only his character would do that particular action, the supporting cast gets forced into agreeing with him, even when they know better. Take this scene for example. Noor and Lin are sent on a quest to defeat a group of regular goblins, but instead run into an Emperor Goblin, a powerful, rare subclass of goblin. Lin knows this is an Emperor Goblin, she acknowledges it. But when they return to the guild and the guild master questions whether they really fought a regular goblin, Noor looks to Lin for confirmation. And what does Lin say? A character who knows better. Indeed, if that's what you say it is, instructor, then that is that, no matter what anybody says. Why the actual fuck would she say something like this? She 100% knows it was an Emperor Goblin, but because she thinks Noor is basically God, she just blindly conforms to him. And that's just one example. This happens all of the time, but by far the most egregious example of this nonsense is when Rolo gets introduced. Rolo is demon folk, a race of demi-humans feared across the land for their ability to control monsters. Their powers were so devastating that they nearly wiped out the holy theocracy 200 years prior, leading to humans hunting them to near extinction. This fear is deeply embedded in everyone's psyche. Lin and Ines know this history and are rightfully terrified of Rolo when they first meet him. A fear that's immediately validated when they watch him controlling a deadly monster, marching it straight toward the royal capital. When the beast breaks free from Rolo's control and attacks him, Noor naturally steps in to save him. After defeating the monster, Noor, oblivious as ever, insists on taking care of Rolo, seeing him as nothing more than an innocent child. Lin and Ines initially reject this, as they should, but then after Noor says literally 2 fucking sentences to try and convince them, they all of a sudden warm up to the idea and go along with Noor's plan. This setup is absolutely fucking insane. This should have been the moment, the breaking point, where Lin and especially Ines adamantly refuse Noor's plan. Demon folk have been feared and hunted for 200 years. Lin and Ines are seeing this fear justified in real time, watching Rolo wield his monster-controlling powers. Why the hell would they suddenly change their minds now, and so quickly? You could maybe, and that's a big maybe, argue that Lin's blind faith in Noor would push her to accept it. Sure, but how the fuck do you explain Ines? Ines's entire purpose is to protect Lin. She's said this multiple times across the runtime of the series. This is the same woman who refused to help Noor fight off Rolo's monster because she heavily prioritized Lin's safety. This is also the same woman who wouldn't even join the initial fight against Xadu for the exact same reason. There is no way Ines would ever allow a walking, talking, extinction-worthy level threat to come anywhere near Lin, let alone agree to Noor's insane plan to take care of him. Yet, she still goes along with it anyway. Why? This is what I mean when I say Noor's character drags everyone else down with him. He doesn't just weaken the plot. He fundamentally breaks other characters, forcing them into decisions and behaviours that contradict their entire backstory and personality just to accommodate his idiocy. Noor doesn't just parry enemies, he parries logic, consistency and character development. Also, he can keep role-playing as Patrick fucking Star. Actually, since we were on the topic of characters, let's break them down. Because trust me, they're not much better than Noor's fundamentally. Lin, or Princess Linneberg, the supposed other main lead of the story, doesn't feel like a lead at all. Hell, she doesn't even feel like a supporting character. She feels more like Noor's loyal pet, wagging her tail and obeying his every command and worldview. Honestly, you could even replace her with an actual dog or cat, and they'd probably be more interesting to watch than Lin's entire character. She contributes absolutely nothing to the story or to the other characters. It's honestly baffling. With the amount of screen time she gets, You'd expect her to have some kind of meaningful role, but instead she spends almost the entire runtime doing absolutely nothing. It's downright embarrassing. Gilbert is arguably worse. He shows up for one episode early on, challenging Noor to a fight. And you know what? He actually has a decent backstory and motivations. But guess what? None of that matters because we never see him again. Not until the show's basically over. And even then, he's on screen for like 2 seconds before dipping. It's so frustrating because the show builds him up like he's going to matter. Like he'll be a relevant player in the plot and its characters. And then completely throws him away. Moving on, Rollo's character is fine, I guess. But honestly, he feels like he doesn't even belong in this story. He exists for 2 reasons and 2 reasons only: to tug on your heartstrings and to control the Calamity Dragon near the end of the show so they can chase down the Emperor who started the war between the Kingdom and the Empire. That's literally it. Once you realise he serves only those 2 purposes, it's hard to see him as anything more than emotional bait. And no, I'm not giving him points for that. He literally doesn't do anything, but sit there and eat fucking potato chips once his purpose is complete. The only character who had any real potential here was Ines. She actually has a solid backstory. When she was younger, she discovered that she had a rare, powerful, magical ability with incredible offensive and defensive potential. However, she accidentally injured one of her classmates when they touched her magic, because that particular classmate was a dumbass, and the guilt caused her to distance herself from others, fearing she'd hurt someone again. Dandalg, recognizing her potential, took her in and trained her with the assistance of the rest of the Sovereign Six. He became the only person she trusted. Now here's where it gets really interesting, or at least it could have. During her more difficult missions with Dandalg, Ines frequently heard him mention a man named Noor, someone she had never met, yet someone important enough for Dandalg to repeatedly praise and acknowledge. It was the very same kind of recognition Ines longed for from Dandalg, but never received herself. So she grew envious of Noor, a man she had never even met, and by the time she finally did meet a man named Noor, she already had a deep-rooted disdain for him, fueled by that jealousy. This setup could have been gold. If Noor were actually written as a real character, Ines and Noor could have had some incredible character interactions, the kind of dynamic that could have carried the show by itself. But because Noor's character is a black hole of wasted potential, Ines's character gets dragged down with him. Her arc is entirely dependent on Noor. And since Noor sucks as a character, she has no way to explore her own, so she's left stagnant, feeling pointless despite having all the foundations of a fantastic character. She already doesn't do much, but knowing she could have been great, only for the writers to do nothing with her, makes it all the more frustrating. Parry Everything had potential, a solid premise, an interesting world, and even a few characters with the groundwork for compelling arcs. But potential doesn't mean much when the execution is this horrendous. The heart of the issue is clear. This anime lives and dies by its characters, and they're disastrously written. Noor, as the main lead, is supposed to carry the show, but instead he drags it, and everyone else, down with him. His parry gimmick quickly goes from novel to nauseating, and his personality, while thematically justified, is so poorly suited to the story's style and setting that it derails everything around him. The supporting cast fares no better. Lynn, Gilbert, Rollo, they all exist more as props than people, serving whatever purpose the plot needs before getting tossed aside. And Ines, she's the most tragic of them all. A character with the setup for a genuinely compelling arc, only to be wasted because her development relies on Noor, who's too incompetent to foster anything meaningful. I give this anime a painful 4 out of 10, and a rating I really did not want to give it. But in the end, Parry Everything doesn't just fail to deliver a good story. It fails at the very foundation of what a character-driven anime needs to succeed. Good, consistent, and engaging characters. Instead, we get a parade of missed opportunities, broken dynamics, and baffling narrative choices. All wrapped around a protagonist who parries everything, including logic and good writing. Again, I understand this is classified as a feel-good anime, but if I wanted to watch that kind of anime, I would just watch Horimiya for the 11th time. Shame, really. But yeah, that's about it. If you made it this far into the video, then you might as well like and subscribe. And be sure to check out the rest of the Worst Anime Ever series, but past that, I'm gone.